Today, we're going to take a look at some unbelievable boss fights sent in from you, the community. And when I was thinking about this video, I actually asked some people over on Twitter which boss fights they found the hardest. And I got a lot of interesting responses. 70 people answered initially, naming a total of 9 top bosses for difficulty. 10 if you include gravity, but Frida, Gale and Midir occurred the most frequently. Most of the DLC bosses take the top spots, as you can see, and that's pretty much how it's always been, in every iteration. Let me know what you think the toughest boss is though, that would be interesting. But among these top 3, a later Twitter poll that I did labelled Midir as the clear champion. Anyway, let's move on to the submissions, beginning at number 10. Artorias the Abyss Walker. Not the real one, but he's about to jump into the first boss of the Ring City DLC. One of the biggest drops in the whole game. There's quite a few in that area. They're just applying their buffs, waiting for the host to get down there, just getting the whole party prepared, and then they're going to race each other as soon as the fog door becomes accessible.
Run! Jump! No, I am! Now! Oh my god! Yes! Double riposte, my god! Double riposte to half its health! That was freaking awesome!
Someone definitely got a little bit excited there. Though I thought that was just a funny one to start off with. A very cool moment with that immense double plunge attack, followed by the double riposte. And they do manage to defeat the first demon from below. Although he unfortunately does get wrecked soon after.
Ow. It was worth the plunge though. Yes.
Moving on to number 9, we have Compound Luke, who's fighting the Nameless King in a quick-scoping only challenge. A very solid boss to choose, one that's consistently challenging, and in this case, Luke has to use the sniper crossbow only. But he cannot lock on during the entire fight. He's only allowed to scope in and immediately fire, essentially a quick scope, or he can fire without aiming the crossbow at all, which would be a no scope, I guess. Now what's initially obvious is that he's doing this all with no armor, so of course that means he really does not want to get hit. It's not so much of an issue in the first stage, but once he defeats the King of the Storm, the Nameless King alone presents much more of a threat. I think using a ranged playstyle like this, you just need to keep as far away from him as possible, and you can see he's doing that. After most shots he runs away to maintain distance, just keeping out of range of his lunge attacks. Overall this fight went really well. It was a bit of an endurance test, a full 15 minutes of quickscoping, which is very impressive, and of course I've cut down a little bit, but definitely a very unique challenge. This next one is a little bit unusual compared to the others. It's more of a sort of a gimmicky, just a very interesting thing. There's always been a few ways to kill bosses without even entering the boss room. Firing a bow at Manus comes to mind, throwing firebombs over the wall for the Capra Demon fight, but this new method comes from the recent DLC where a new pyromancy called Seething Chaos can be found. It's essentially a fireball, but it takes about 4 seconds to explode if it's thrown onto a surface. Originally I thought this would be a great crowd control pyromancy. I imagine it could work quite well in team arena battles. In this case we have a co-oping Sunbro who throws the Seething Chaos in front of the fog wall while the host lures the boss closer on the other side. Each explosion is dealing roughly 2,000 damage, which is absolutely crazy. What you have to consider is this is his hyper mode setup. He has 2 Morion blades in each hand, which increases damage output by 20% when he's on low critical health. And believe it or not, this effect does stack with a second Morion blade. He'll also have a very high intelligence and faith, because that's what the Pyromancy Flames scale with, so it's a typical glass cannon build. Later on he's switched to Great Chaos Fire Orbs. Don't think he needed to, just a change of scenery. Likes to keep things fresh I suppose. That is how you become the ultimate helpful Sunbro. Pretty good. This one I think could be quite inspiring. It's the Twin Princes boss fight, which is actually just such a cool boss. But this challenge run was inspired by one of the first ever challenge runs from Dark Souls 1, called the Class Challenge. And it was started by Epic Namebro, and basically requires you to use only the equipment your class starts with. So in this case, the Thief gets the Bandit's Knife, Deserter Armor, and the Thief's Mask. And you have to defeat all the bosses in the game without leveling up or healing. Can't infuse your weapon either, so he's got some charcoal pine bundles instead. I think it's a really fun challenge. Of course, it requires a lot of skill because you are restricted to soul level 1 and you're using gear that is absolutely not optimal, but it is going to make you more familiar with the starting classes, which would be a bonus. In this case, he defeats the boss flawlessly with the Thief class, taking no damage with just a little dagger and a whole lot of perfect timing. Quite a difficult one to do flawlessly, I would think, as well, because of the teleporting. But yeah, this idea is definitely a fun one, and I would recommend it. Pontiff Sullivan, a challenging boss by all accounts, with very long attack combos and not that many openings. And that's just the first stage. Daniel here is attempting to beat this boss with fists only, without rolling, blocking or parrying, because you can actually parry this boss, if you didn't know. But this is actually incredible because he just doesn't make a single mistake. Think about how challenging it is not to be able to roll or dodge, because that's like 90% of Souls combat usually. He's in dragon form from using the Dragon Torso stone, so essentially he has no defenses whatsoever. But what this does mean is he can use the Dragon Roar ability to boost attack damage by about 10% for a few seconds, which is extremely important for the second stage of the fight. Eventually Pontiff will summon a phantom clone of himself, and they will begin to mirror each other's attacks with the clone striking first. Lots of RNG involved really, so that's why he's in dragon form, and as soon as the second clone starts being summoned, he goes for the damage boost and kills it as fast as possible. At the end here, Daniel ends up completing his challenge without taking any damage, and therefore without healing either. Merlin the Elf is up next, and he's cleverly bent the rules. I said that this week's topic would be PvE only. But of course there is a PvP boss, isn't there? Where a real player is summoned as part of the Spears of the Church Covenant, and they take the role of the boss. I've done a video about this already, if you're interested. So, they initially defeat the NPC that is part of the boss fight, a simple painting guardian, and then they fight the Spears of the Church Covenant member, who's summoned in by the Adjudicator, who is of course a real player. As we know, the player boss cannot heal in this fight using Estus, so this is actually the perfect place to troll like this. Armour of Thorns, for those not aware, is the armour that the invader Kirk wears, and rolling or quick stepping into enemies while wearing the set does damage. 2 damage per item, and it stacks, so I guess 8 in total. But you can increase that number again with rings and such.
He's like, F me. It's just running away.
He's just accepted that. Yes.
Point up, point up.
Point up. And then sleep, and then sleep, and then sleep.
Well, this boss fight is definitely not as hard as it used to be, eh? Before it got patched anyway. Very funny though. Definitely not what I expected to see. Next we have a complete domination of Champion Gundyr. Essentially Udix Gundyr, but with much more aggressive attacks and a greater health pool. Let's address the elephant in the room. This submission comes with a hand cam. And apparently he's naturally right-handed as well, but just wanted to make it hard for himself. He's using 720, so that's 2 spins, behind the back parries as his only way of attacking. Which, yeah, it's just ridiculous, but I love it. If you're going to showboat, go all the way. but after every riposte he performs the point down gesture as well, just to add insult to injury. You might be wondering, how the hell is he doing this with one hand? Well, he's remapped the controller so that L1 is parry, L2 is dodge, the down D-pad button is now the R1 attack, and so on. So essentially the skillful part here is relearning how to play the entire game, but only with one hand, a different set of controls. I mean, this boss is hard enough using both hands, let alone the spinning riposte only rules, so this is very impressive. At number 3, we have the boss voted third most difficult by our spontaneous Twitter poll, Sister Frieda, the main boss of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, a boss with a whopping 3 stages, all separated with a cutscene. Now this is not very hard when co-oping with a team, it has to be said, but solo this boss can be very challenging. As I said, it's quite long. Frieda becomes increasingly more aggressive and you have to simultaneously fight Ariandel in one of the stages. In terms of why this clip is on the list, High Voltage is on New Game Plus 7, the hardest difficulty, and he's trying to beat the boss with just a torch. The torch is actually considered to be worse than using bare fists in many cases. Horrible moveset. It also barely stuns enemies, and stunlocking Frieda would make things quite a bit easier, so that's already challenging. Honestly, these last 3 clips are pretty much god tier. The patience you need to do something like this is a lot. So he's finished off the first section here. Not too bad, I guess, if you've got perfect reaction timings. But the second stage is much harder, I would say. How are you supposed to keep an eye on both Ariandel and Frieda without taking a single bit of damage? I have no idea, because you have to consider the AoE attacks they have. Frieda's flying around shooting ice attacks everywhere, while Ariandel is quite happy smashing around setting the room on fire. Also, have to bear in mind that Frieda goes invisible and heals periodically as well, so you have to keep a track of where she is the whole time. In the third and final stage, she becomes Black Flame Frieda, and this is arguably the hardest section because she now deals dark damage as well as frost and mainly becomes a whole lot more fast and aggressive. If you're wondering how long that took, it was 20 minutes of pure concentration and skill. Second on the list of most difficult boss fights, most people said was Slave Knight Gale. Really amazing setting, and arguably the final boss of the entire series. Parallax is attempting the impossible. He's on a soul level 1 character and he's making an attempt at beating Gale without rolling or blocking, and of course without taking damage, but that's just a given at this point. Imagine not being able to roll in this fight, that's crazy, because you can't parry him, or perform any critical strikes for that matter, so you're not really going to be interrupting him much, and he leaves very few openings available anyway. Most of his attacks cover huge distances as well, especially his lunging ones, so I just can't believe that it's actually possible to not take damage while not rolling. Now I initially thought there were 2 stages to this fight. There are actually 3. First one is pretty simple, he only uses his greatsword. Second one starts after a cutscene, about a third of the way through. And the final stage occurs during the last third after a big red shockwave and is on a whole other level. This is where AoE damage just goes off the scale, with random lightning strikes, aerial combos and tracking soul projectiles being very tough to avoid. I noticed back here in the second stage, he was extremely lucky not to get hit by the Way of White Corona miracle. That one can be hard to avoid. But then in the final stage, this aerial flying attack makes me clench. You need to get lucky and start running at a good angle to avoid that. And then we have the cape, which just flaps around after all of his attacks. There's a lot of times where it seems like it's inevitable he's going to get clipped by it, but somehow always just avoids it. And we've arrived at number 1, where I think I'm going to find it difficult to know what to say, because I genuinely can't believe that this attempt even exists. Of course, it's the big dragon himself, Dark Eater Midir, which gives people the most trouble, and it's not hard to see why. This boss is gigantic, both in terms of his health pool and size, and this heroic player, G-Soul, is attempting to defeat it at soul level 1 with absolutely nothing. He's naked using just his fists. Midir has about 20,000 health on the higher new game cycles, and each punch is doing about 40 or 50 damage. So do the maths, this will take a long while. I'll tell you how long this took actually, in a little bit. I wonder if you'll be able to guess. It's a long time. This dragon has very high defense. What you want to do is hit him in the head for double the damage, but even then it won't do that much, especially with no weapons. If we just skip forward a little bit, there's an interesting technique to this fight, where if you've been consistently striking Midir's head throughout the whole fight, like G-Soul here has obviously been doing, by the end the dragon will stagger, and you'll actually have a chance to critically attack it for about 2,500 damage. Now that is a little bit of a reward for his effort. I do feel like it's only fair to point out that he actually does make one tiny slip up. Although that being said, it's very debatable as to whether it was his fault or just random chance, to be honest. Look here when he rolls out of the mass affinity attack. A bunch of them seem to randomly clip his feet right at the end as he rolls, so that's technically the only thing that went wrong in this entire fight. And what it means is he heals with his Estus once. He started the fight with 3 Estus and ends with 2, so I guess it's not technically a flawless fight. It almost makes it more impressive because you can actually appreciate how hard it is now, especially when I reveal how long this fight took. Alright, this is the longest clip I was sent by far. This entire fight, from start to finish, lasts for 1.5 hours. Or 1 hour and 25 minutes to be precise. I think if I could focus like that for an hour and a half, I would probably have a master's degree by now, but anyway, the point is, if you lose focus for a couple seconds, Midir can one-shot you. That's the thing. Some of his attacks do really, really high damage, and because he has such high defenses and health, the chances of making a mistake just become much higher, just because of the length of time that it takes. Not to mention, it's a big fat dragon, so it's hard to keep the whole thing in view without your camera going berserk. So all in all, this submission blew my mind. I think it's an incredible feat, and I would definitely go over to his channel, which is linked below with all the others. Congratulate them all. Let them know what you think. I'm sure they'd appreciate that. But thanks a lot, everyone, for going through so much torture. Next topic will be top 10 funny moments, I think. Yeah, I have a bit more of a light-hearted one, so more instructions will be in the description below. One more piece of news, I have finally finished university. I'll talk about it a bit more in another video, I think. I don't want this one to drag on, but feels good, man. Alright, I think that's it for now. Thank you for helping and participating once again, and I'll see you in a little bit.